Thanks, Meg. Hey, good morning, everyone. It's really good to be with you. If you were away last week or didn't know, last week, kind of last minute, I wasn't able to be here. Silas and I were on the 403 and got rear-ended. It was one of those weird, sometimes traffic does that, and all of a sudden, whatever starts it, initiates it, it's like, stop. And so we hit our brakes pretty quickly, but we're able to come to a stop, and then I looked in the rearview mirror and I said, hang on, bud, that car's not stopping. We got slammed from behind, and everyone in, there's 4 cars involved. We got hit from behind, pushed into the car in front of us, and then another car hit that car. So it was like this big mess last Friday night, but everyone was okay, and I was just I still am a little stiff. I feel like I'm walking a little bit older. I was saying to Craig and Kathy, I feel like I'm walking like I'm a little bit older, and they didn't listen to me about that, but I do. I feel like I'm a bit older. I feel like, anyways, so everyone's okay. And so last minute, I called Matt Hill, and most of you, or many of you were here last week when Matt kind of jumped in last minute. And I just want to publicly just thank Matt for his willingness to do that. Is Matt even here today? See, he helped lead last week, so now he's like, I'm taking the next week off. But I just wanted to say I was so grateful for Matt and heard so many good things about Matt just sharing his own journey with Jesus, just real personally what he's been up to, what God's been teaching him. And so that was great. 2 weeks ago, we started this teaching series on the life of David. And then it got paused, obviously, because of my accident and Matt stepping in. And normally we would resume that conversation. Then we'd be right back to our series, Life and Teachings of David, King David. But as a leadership team, we've decided to kind of pause again and let you know a few things that are happening in the church. And in some ways, a lot of what we're going to be talking about is a bit of an in-house piece. Normally, we would do these conversations in an evening. We would invite everyone over to someone's house. We'd have food, dessert, talk about things like a family meeting style. But we realized that in order for us to try to get more and more people involved in the conversation and able to attend, it requires us to maybe do some more things on a Sunday morning. So that's why we're doing it today. It's kind of like that family meeting. Did anyone grow up with family meetings? Yeah, you guys? Okay, so we had those too. I'm not sure. It usually signaled we were about to move. It seems like it's the only time my parents would call a family meeting is like we were going to move. By the time I was in grade 11, we had moved 11 times. So it was like a regular thing. You knew you're getting called to the living room, we're moving. It was one of those things, 11 moves by the time I hit grade 11. And I do remember the spring of grade 10, my parents were like, hey, everyone, boys, come to the living room. We never hung out in the living room. It was only my parents' friends would go to the living room, but that was our family meeting spot. It was special. It was like God was telling us something important when we were in the living room. And they're like, guess what? We're leaving Toronto and moving to a town called Meaford, which we had never heard of. We were not happy about that family meeting. But anyways, family meetings can be an important rhythm. The funny thing is, as much as I attach to them, we have family meetings in our family. I don't know if you do. It's we sometimes do this. Normally, here's how we use them. We use them as a way of resetting what it means to be family. It's a chance maybe if you're a parent and you lie awake at night and you're like, this is never what I thought being a parent would look like. This is not what I thought family life would look like. We gotta talk. We gotta figure this out. We gotta get back on track to the things that we value the most, the time we spend together, our rhythms as a family. And so we'd have a little family meeting chat. We still do those. Is Tabea in here? No, I don't want to embarrass her, but we're due for another family meeting. We're kind of in that zone, in all transparency. It's probably happening this afternoon. So family meeting at the Vincents tonight. Anyways, so we've used it to kind of reset, also just to help share important information. When we're a family and we're tracking together and moving forward together, it's important to have these kinds of conversations. And so as our church has grown over the last 4 years, we realized inviting everyone to our house or someone else's house on a Sunday evening to have this, we only capture a few of the people. And so we want to have more people involved in this update. So if you're visiting this morning, I know that feels like, oh crap, of all the Sundays to pick, but I hope it's this. I hope it serves you in 2 ways. Number one, my hope is that you see our transparency and our humility and our desire to be authentic and open with each other, and that this may be indicative of who we are as a church and what we're trying to accomplish as we're working to follow Jesus together. So it may not be what you're expecting this morning, but hopefully there's a little window into who we are as a Reunion in the way we operate and how we try to have these conversations. Less like a big business and more like a family meeting. So we're not moving. It's nothing to do with that. But it's an important thing. As our leadership team has been talking, we felt like it's important as we're starting 2019 to have this conversation. It would have been last week until the lady hit me on the 403. So you can blame her. But I want to bring up a couple pictures of people who lead in our context. We don't really bring this up very often or talk about it. But the first slide is the ministry leadership team. Yeah, so these are people who in different areas give leadership to the different things we do, from kids to events and outreach to Sunday morning programming to integration to welcoming visitors. This is the crew of people who help kind of shape different areas of ministry and leadership and are helping us grow and understand our blind spots and get better. So I can do kind of what I do, and they do different things. And so if you don't like what happens this morning, you can talk to any of these faces and just ream them out. That would be fine. And then we have another group of people, for lack of a better word, we call them our elders team. And these are women and men who help kind of take a step back and say, okay, what is God saying to us as a church? What has God been teaching us, revealing to us? Where is he leading us, and how do we get there? Kind of some basic questions that we use to frame our conversation. What has God been teaching us as a church? What are we discovering about ourselves? What is he calling us into in the next season? And then how on earth do we get there? So as we've been having these conversations, back in the summer, actually, we started having a financial conversation. So we started paying attention to be like, you know what, we're kind of getting behind financially. What does this mean? What does that look like? And so some of what we're talking about today, or a lot of what we're talking about today, is our money. And I know in our culture, that's probably one of the worst topics. And especially if you're a visitor, it's probably like the worst thing you feel like you've walked into. Again, though, I hope it's like revealing on how we as disciples and followers of Jesus try to talk about the money we've been given, how we steward it well, how we use it together to try to accomplish what God's doing in our collective spiritual family here. So we will be talking about that, and also talking about how that then translates into our sense of vision and calling, and where we really do believe God is leading us. And so we, back in the summer, started having these conversations. We wanted to pay attention to it. Through the fall and into the end of the year, we were trying our best to communicate as we're learning how to communicate this stuff kind of for the first time in this way. And some people responded, and so that's been great. Let me just start this whole, as soon as we hear finances, I just want off the top say there's many people here who support and give and sacrifice and have partnered with us financially from the very beginning. And so on behalf of the leaders and what's happening in our church, I just want to say thank you. I know none of this happens without people giving and working together. And so just off the top, this is not about trying to point fingers. This is not trying to make anyone feel guilty. If there's one conversation that the outside world looks on the church, they always think maybe the church is always after their money. This is not a conversation that we're after all your money. That's not what this is about. This is about, okay, so who are we going to be as a church, and how do we get there? And how do we move from beyond the, hey, let's start a church mode to, can we survive as a church mode? Can we be self-sufficient and sustainable? So we have some slides here just to quickly walk you through, and then I want to unpack some stuff and just build it more into a conversation. So this is just a snapshot of 2018. We didn't have all these numbers when we gave the update kind of in December, but this is where we're at. So the amazing thing is we raised just over $100,000 from you guys, gave to the church, and we had a last installment from our denominational family, the Be in Christ Church of Canada. They help us plant churches, and so they had, over the period of 3 years, been putting in chunks of money to help us, and this last year, they gave us $15,000 as a way of blessing, supplementing, helping us, and so there's our total, $115,500, which I think is amazing. When we started praying in our living room 4 years ago, like, we didn't think anyone would give any money to anything. We thought there's like this, would this even happen? So I feel like that is a huge thing. But we also know that it costs money to do what we do, and so you'll see our costs at the bottom were $134. So obviously we ended the year short. So like any family, when you end kind of short, it's important to talk about. Now, the good news is when we were meeting in the early days and we had some gifts from our denominational family, we didn't use all that money. We didn't need it. We weren't renting. We weren't doing some of the things we're trying to do. So we were building up a surplus. So if the next slides will show you that we had a surplus, and so we had about $25,000 saved up, which was awesome. And we used $18,000 of that. So you'll now see that we're kind of running thin in terms of reserve. We have $7,000, and that's kind of where we're at. Which some fundraising friends said, hey, every time you have extra money in the bank as a kind of a organization, a church that requires on donations, you're kind of already in a good spot. But it also means that if this trend continues, we are going to be in some kind of trouble, and we're going to have to talk about what that means, and we'll come to that. So we have worked, Megan has done an amazing job trying to figure out how do we get our budget into a zone that we think can work, and so our proposed budget for 2019 is $116,000. She said before, when Megan was up here back in the fall, we talked about this is for us just to kind of do what we're doing. This is for us to kind of stay as it is, nothing new. We also know that in December, we talked about the sense of leading that God was pulling us into, and for lack of a better term, we called it Vision 1+1+1. The idea of what does it mean to be engaged in a strategic way locally, what does it mean to be engaged in a strategic way nationally, and one thing globally. So like 3 different circles of engagement, of moving beyond, hey, can we do this together, to like, okay, now how are we as a church going to love, serve, bless, care for those who happen to be in our city, our country, and our world. And so the 116 allows us to keep going, but it's not any funds that allow us to say, okay, so God, what is next? And they all have to work together. My fear would be, yeah, we hit the 116, but we don't take any steps into being a blessing beyond ourselves. Because then you have to have conversations. So are we just doing this for ourselves, or what does this mean? Anyways, we can talk some more about that. Next slide. Okay, so just to break it down, and hopefully in some easy terms, so on average, it costs us about $9,700 a month. Some of you may say, oh, that's a huge number. Some of you say that's not a big deal. I guess it all depends what kind of our vocation is, our background, our work-related kind of worlds. That may not seem like a big deal. For us, that's our reality. That's where we're at. And our current donations from people who are signed up and giving is about $7,800. So I'm not the dad in the family meeting. Like, I never want to take on that role, but I feel like the big brother saying, okay, I just want to let you know kind of where we're at. So we're kind of in the living room, and I'm just kind of saying, so our shortfall right now is $1,900 a month on average. So I don't know how that strikes you. I don't know if that feels like insurmountable. Pack it up now. I don't know how you feel. Depending on how I'm doing, I kind of go one way or the other. Sometimes it feels like, oh man, that's a lot of money to come up with a month. And other times I think, wait, as people join, as we go, as we stretch ourselves, maybe this is something we can accomplish and do together. I do believe that. A friend asked me, are you feeling discouraged? And I would say, and honestly, I'm not at all. It partly could just be my personality, and sometimes I just don't worry about those kinds of things, but I'm not worried. I just think, like, as we move forward, we figure out the next step, but it's important, and that's why I appreciate the leadership team. It's important to have eyes on what's going on and the right people to say, hey, we need to be concerned about this or not concerned about it, and so thank you for those who have been that voice in my life. Oh yeah, and I should have noted that the funding from our denominational family is like over. They have been amazing, encouraging us, blessing us, but now it's like that time where you're on your own. You got to make it or break it or make some changes or tweaks, but it's up to you guys. So this is kind of who we are. We have 66 households, and that could be anywhere from like a one-person, single person who's like, I represent a household, to a couple represents one household, to a family with 3 or 4 kids represents one household. So our best our best records would put us at 66 households. I think there's some that have been joining us this fall who aren't fully on that yet, but we have about 66 households represented, and 42 of those give. Now you'll see the breakdown and what that means. There's 18 giving households who, on a monthly basis, that's either pre-authorized debit or online through Canada Helps, are regularly giving and contributing to our mission as a church. We have some folks, about 8 people, who have given gifts either maybe 3 times over the course of a year, up to 11 times, so almost monthly. And we have 16 people who have given once or twice over the course of a year. So that's kind of how those giving units break up. Again, this is about me being the voice of saying thank you so much for those who give. We know that at any time when you're giving money to be a part of something beyond yourselves, it feels difficult and it's a stretch and it's a sacrifice. And so I just want to say thank you so much for that. And we have to figure out what we're going to do together. So then just some ideas on what that looks like. So again, thank you to everyone who's giving. Maybe as you go away from here, some of those household units can consider, does this mean, or now that we have this information, is there a possibility that we could change or tweak or increase our monthly giving? Or also, maybe that means as you've looked at it, you're like, actually, we're in a worse spot than when we signed up to give monthly. We have to adjust it. We know that ebbs and flows of life happen. But maybe there's some folks who say, actually, the $1,900, that's short. I can help make up some of that. Maybe there's some people who aren't currently giving. And so this is the first time for you to be able to take a look at your monthly budget, where you're at. If you need help in that, talk to me and I will point you to someone else. That's the best way to say it. There's lots of people and resources out there that can help you with this kind of stuff. But if that can be a service to you, like as you're managing and thinking about your own finances, maybe the first thing is for you to get yourself kind of figured out and then say, I want to contribute. I'm a part of the Reunion family, and for whatever reason, a whole host of things just haven't stepped in that way. So maybe this is kind of the first way that you're like, man, let's get involved and be a part of it. The concept of tithing is a really interesting one. It used to be more popular in days gone by. We're going to talk about that in a second when we kind of crack into some scripture, but the idea of a tithe was a 10%. It was this rhythm that was established where it was like 10% of everything we make automatically goes back to the church and God and the work we're doing together. If you stop and think about it, if you think about 10% of what you make, that probably freaks you out, the idea of like, how would I ever do that? Other people, though, are thinking maybe on the way and think, actually, I could move into a tithing kind of mode. Again, our gifts and our giving aren't based on, I'm going to give this to God out of a sense of guilt or frustration or I have to. I'm going to give this to you, God. Hopefully you bless me back. It's as a response to the blessing and gifts that God has already given us. So it's an act of worship and giving back. So tithing is an idea. And then remember that any gifts you get is you receive a charitable receipt. Sometimes that's really important for you. I guess it's important to all of us, but to different degrees. And so just wanted to remind you that all the gifts to us as a church are tax deductible. Okay, and just some ways to give. Either you can give online, monthly withdrawals, or good old-fashioned cash or check in the offering basket. Okay, I wanna just kind of break this down a little bit and talk a little bit in terms of I think trying to give it some context and some history and some foundation when we talk about giving. So it doesn't feel like we're just having one of those conversations about, hey, we need some money, what do you want to do? There are times where it feels like, it could feel like, wouldn't it just be easier if God just gave us this huge influx of cash somehow? Like this big like cash bag, boom, drop down. Like wouldn't that be easy? I don't know if anyone ever thinks about financial struggles like that. But it can be part of our thinking sometimes where it feels like, man, if God would just give us this big drop of money, then we wouldn't have to worry about this. We could move forward with our vision over the next few years. We could know that we're not tight. We could maybe invest and do some different things that we're currently not doing. Do you guys know the story in the Old Testament? I'm going to read it for you, where Elijah meets the widow. And he's starving, and he asks her to make some food. Do you know this story? I want to read it for you. It's from 1 Kings. We'll drop it up on the slide here. This is from 1 Kings 17. This is kind of like that never-ending money scenario, but it was something that happened in the Old Testament times. It says this, "Then the Lord said to Elijah, 'Go and live in the village of Zarephath near the city of Sidon. I have instructed a widow there to feed you.' So he went to that place, and he arrived at the gates of the village. He sees a widow gathering sticks, and he says to her, 'Would you please bring me a little water in a cup?' As she was going to get it, he called to her, 'Bring me a bite of bread too.' But she said, 'I swear by the Lord your God that I don't have a single piece of bread in the house, and I only have a handful of flour left in the jar and a little cooking oil in the bottom of a jug. I was just gathering a few sticks to cook this last meal, and then my son and I will die.' Wow. But Elijah said to her, 'Don't be afraid. Go ahead and do just what you said, but make a little bread for me first. Then use what's left to prepare a meal for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. There will always be flour and olive oil left in your containers until the time when the Lord sends rain and the crops grow again.' So she did as Elijah said, and she and Elijah and her family continued to eat for many days. There was always enough flour and olive oil left in the containers, just as the Lord had promised through Elijah." So the sense of like this never-ending like money change basket, it's always there, it keeps going. Wouldn't that be awesome if God did that? I don't know if that's ever in your narrative or your thoughts. But we have to ask the question, would that actually be better for us? Would it actually be better for us to always have this endless supply of money? Would that help us as we're striving to become transformed and changed as followers of Jesus? Would that be more formational for us? Would that be better? I don't think so, but maybe. I don't think so, though. I think there's a lesson to be learned in what money does to us and how it shapes us and the control it potentially has over us and what it means to be freed from those powers. So, did anyone grow up? I don't know if you grew up in the church. I grew up in the church. I've shared that many, many times. But anyone give up like passing an offering basket? Yeah, so the offering basket in my Baptist church growing up was not like this. This was the basket, little bag we have at the back, and it gets used very rarely. But but it's always back there because you never know. But when we started the church, when we were in our living room, it felt really weird that, like, for Bobby and I, that we were like, should we, like, we don't take an offering in our living room. That's, hey, come over to our house. Hey, and would you mind? Like that, you know, like one of those long poles so you can reach the people in the corner. Like we did, like, of course we didn't do that. And so from the beginning of Reunion, we never really passed a basket. And I think part of it was my own hang up because it felt really weird in the beginning days, just practically. It felt really weird to pass a basket. And we would never do that. So we had a little thing in our kitchen that if anyone wanted to drop in to help cover some food and snacks for the night, they could. But you didn't have to. And then that kind of just transitioned, and Carrie came with us when we went to the moonshine, and it's like, man, we're at the moonshine, like we're having singing and prayer and scripture, and then we're eating sausages and drinking beer. Like, you don't take an offering while you're doing church that way. That would feel really weird. And then it just kind of continued on where we've always just had the basket. And it hasn't meant that we don't want people to contribute. It just felt like we just don't do that. And I think part of it was my hang up of feeling like I want people to be able to come here to Reunion and hang out and never feel like our goal is money. I just don't want that to be the thing. There's too many times where that is the thing, or that's the stereotype of the church. It's like, I just don't want that to be the thing. But then on the flip side, I realized, so what is that also teaching, and how is that shaping us by never being honest about the conversation and about our need as a church to give and partner together this way? So we want to talk about the basket, because as a leadership team, we've been talking about, is it time for us to pass a basket? So there's part of me that's like, there's no way we're getting $1,900 extra in this basket a month. Can you imagine, though? Like, all in loonies? That would be amazing. No, there's no way, right? That's not going to happen. But here's the thing. Here's the thing about this basket. It's more than what just comes in here, what it also represents. And our friends on the leadership team helped me realize this. And I've been stewing about it no, that sounds like I've been upset. I've been thinking, pondering, working it through in my own way, trying to figure out what's my own baggage from my kind of church past. And what is really then important, and what does it mean for us as a church? Because I don't want my own personal things to get in the way of what God is wanting to teach us as a church. So here's some things to think about. I'm going to come back to this basket. So right off the top, giving and partnering together financially has always been a part of the story for the people of God. Even before the nation of Israel was chosen as a special nation, there's a story in Genesis where Abraham was still called Abram. He hadn't got his new name yet. Abram was returning from this battle. And this representative from God comes to him and meets him and offers a blessing on behalf of God to Abram. And Abram, out of response of worship and how God has protected and blesses, offers a tenth of everything he has back. That's like this first indication, one of these indications of tithing that pops up in the Old Testament scriptures. So right in the very beginning there, this sense of giving back. It's always been a part of the story. And then as the nation of Israel gets established, this became written into their rhythm of life as a people. We call it the Old Testament laws, but if you don't know what that means, it means like this group of people had these instructions from God. It says this is what it means to be the people of God, and he helped lay out a whole bunch of things. Part of that was what it meant to give back and to recognize that everything we have ultimately finds its source and beginning with God. And so let me read from you. This is one of the parts of the book of Leviticus. Leviticus, where it outlines Old Testament law for the nation of Israel. It says this, Leviticus 27, 1/10 of the produce of the land, whether grain from the fields or fruit from the trees, belongs to the Lord and must be set apart to him as holy. If you want to buy back the Lord's tenth of grain or fruit, you must pay its value plus 20%. So if you want to give it, but you want to get it back, then you're going to pay more for that. Count off every 10th animal from your herds and flocks and set them apart for the Lord as holy. So part of their rhythm as a nation was to tithe, to give back, to participate, to support what God was doing, and to recognize, again, every good and perfect gift comes from our Father. And so tithing became a part of the rhythm. And Jesus, as a Jewish person growing up, this is all he would know. This was part of his rhythm, part of his world, and he doesn't do anything to dismantle that. In fact, he lets that be what it is, and then he encourages something deeper and greater, and he kind of gets behind it. He gets behind just hey, don't just give a tenth, but where's your heart? Where's your motives? What's driving you as you give? And we're going to look at a couple things Jesus says. So in Matthew chapter 6, we talked about this, I think that was maybe 2 years ago, we were working through this, the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus comes to them and talks about the attitude and posture of how people are giving and the motivation. He says this in Matthew chapter 6. He says, watch out. This is Jesus speaking. Don't do your good deeds publicly to be admired by others, for you will lose the reward from your Father in heaven. When you give to someone in need, don't do it as the hypocrites do, blowing trumpets in the synagogues and streets to call attention to their acts of charity. I tell you the truth, they have received all the reward they will ever get. But when you give to someone in need, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Give your gifts in private, and your Father who sees everything will reward you. So Jesus kind of transitioned things. He's like, the motivation, your heart posture is what's really, really important here. Do it in such a way that even your left hand doesn't know what your right hand is doing as you're giving, blessing, caring for orphans, widows, those in need, as you're giving to support the work, what God is up to. Almost kind of separate yourself so that you're not looking for outside praise and admiration, because that's not what it's about. Our posture and our motives are wrong when we're doing that, and he's correcting people. And then there's this really, really interesting story that I've been chewing on for the last couple of weeks as I've been thinking about this talk. And it's this really interesting snapshot. You may know this, you may not know this story. It's this really, really short snapshot of a story where Jesus, in Mark's gospel, Mark's account of Jesus' life, Mark chapter 12, again, it'll be up on the screen, where Jesus is watching people give. Here's what it says. Jesus sat down near the collection box in the temple and watched as the crowds dropped in their money. Many rich people put in large amounts. Then a poor widow came and dropped in 2 small coins. Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I tell you the truth, this poor widow has given more than all the others who are making contributions. For they gave a tiny part of their surplus, but she, poor as she is, has given everything she had to live on. So the worst version of church is where people try to use this as a prototype for giving. You should give everything. Give everything. You can't eat? Give everything. Can't afford your rent? Give everything. And I think it's been used in a manipulative kind of way to try to get people's money. But that's not what's going on here. Jesus is pointing to a whole different level of motivation. It's like, what's happening here? And what do we learn from those who give out of their surplus? I gave $1,000. Look at me. But I have $1 million at home. Or I don't have really much of anything, and I'm going to give it. I'm going to acknowledge that everything comes from God. There's 2 different postures, 2 different pulls, 2 different powers at work in that. And Jesus is calling out that hypocrisy, this idea of how are we giving, what is shaping us, and why are we doing what we're doing. And I think that's really important for us today, too. When we talk about a shortfall as a church, we're not driven to say everyone has to do the exact same thing. We are all in very, very different places financially. And as a friend and as a pastor, I would rather see you find health and freedom from whatever financially is bogging you down first than to feel like, I'm so stuck, but I got to, and a sense of guilt or shame motivates you. At the same time, we also want to be honest about and how are we going to do this as a church? How are we going to make up, and not only make up so that we keep doing the things we're doing, but how do we move forward? How do we move beyond ourselves to be a blessing and encouragement, help love and care for those people locally, nationally, and globally? And we're not talking about taking on the whole thing. When we, if you haven't been here for the conversation, we're trying to say, what is one way we can love and serve and be involved in our city here? We're not trying to do it all. We're just saying, what is one specific thing? Let's focus on that. Nationally, what does that look like? One specific thing, and we've talked about First Nations conversations and learning, having a posture of listening and learning and being available to say, God, what does it look like to be agents of peace and help in a situation and a breakdown that's so clear, that's so obvious? How do we as followers of Jesus, with humility, move in to listen, learn, and then be available for God in that context? And then internationally, we've been learning and shaping from the BIC Church in Kenya, and we've been talking about that a little bit. And so back in the fall, we raised money to allow, I think it was Meg, help me, $800? $802. I think we only needed $750 though, right? So we had a breakfast. Our goal was $750. On a Sunday morning, we raised $803. And we sent that over to them, and that has allowed them as a church, a new fledgling church in Kenya, to register and become official with the government. And why another church hadn't met that, who knows? But out of relationship we started forming with them, it's like, we can do that together. And so we were able to do that in the fall, and now we're sensing that globally there's so many things that could grab our attention. But what if we just say, Anthony and his family, as he gives leadership there and is planting churches, let's just follow relationship. That's what this whole adventure has been. We're just trusting and following relationship together. So the $1,900 to me feels like, okay, so what does that mean then? Giving is always part of a rhythm, has always been a part of a rhythm. It's always been a part of acknowledging that everything we have comes from God, and we don't do it because we have to. We do it as a response of worship and thanks. So what does that mean then to collectively pull together and say, okay, how are we going to do this? How are we going to meet this? And how on earth does an offering basket, what does that have to mean? So can I share a few things about this? I may be wrong, but I don't anticipate $1,900 to show up in this every month and then all of a sudden things are changed. But one of the things I realize in our conversations and our prayer times is that it is a huge leap for someone to go from not giving anything to going to the back, picking up a pre-authorized debit form, taking it home, filling it out, finding a check. Who knows where their checkbook is? Okay, well, a few people. Thanks a lot, Jason. Okay, if you're like me, I have no idea. Like, if I needed a void check right now, I'd have to, like, order a new booklet. I've had so many booklets starting at, like, 50 again, check number 50. Anyways, sidetracked. Oh, it's a huge leap to expect someone to jump on for the first time. So by only having the basket there, most people don't carry cash, or the way they to be involved in a monthly way would be to fill out all that form. So you have to really want to give to take those steps, because all of us forget that kind of stuff. I think most of us are on pre-authorized payment or whatever. It's because we won't remember otherwise, right? It's okay to be honest with that. Like, if we don't have it, it won't show up. We will forget to give, we're away. So that keeps it easy, and that's amazing for us as a church too, because we know what's coming, it's a bit more predictable. But it's a useful tool. But let me suggest this: when we no longer pass the plate, I think one thing that it does in a formative kind of way is it distances us from the idea that we're participating in this together. I think it creates a gap. Pre-authorized debit, all those things are wonderful. But when we don't think about it, when it's out of sight and out of mind, then is there a gap that's created where we forget that we're doing this together? The whole point of the early church was that we were doing and accomplishing and working together. So here's our plan. Our plan is that we're going to start passing this basket in this way. Just like every Sunday when we come and we break the bread and we dip it in the juice, every week this is part of our rhythm to remember our source of hope and freedom and forgiveness and identity is found in Jesus as a church. That's like a tangible reminder. We touch it, we taste it, we remember who we are. My hope is that and I'll need all you to help us continue to tell this story in the years ahead, that the day and the weeks we started passing the basket, it wasn't because we needed $1,900. It was part of us realizing we do have a need, but it's also a tangible, tactile reminder that we're doing this together no matter how we give. And so as this goes around, it's like, I'm a part of this together. I'm a part of this with you. I'm a part of this with you. I had a friend growing up. We were at a church in Toronto. It was before that dreaded grade 10 family meeting in the living room. But I had a friend at that church who, he was a bit of a jokester, and we would have been in grade, 7 or 8 then. And he always came with his grandma to church. And he got a ton of coins. His grandma would give him change every week, and he just kind of kept saving up, not putting it in the offering plate as it went by, till he had like 2 mittfuls of change. And then as it came by, he just kind of did one of these, like, where everyone just kind of looks at him. He was like trying to get all the attention. This isn't about getting attention, about centering any people out. I also grew up in a church world where sometimes when the offering went around, there was like the offertory. There'd be like a special prayer, the pastor would say something, the church would recite something, or there was that, sometimes there'd be special music too, like church people, this is where our weirdness shows, but there's this one song, it went like, thank you for giving to the Lord. I am a life that was changed. And they were like, crap, I wasn't going to give, but someone's singing that song, and now I got to give. It was like one of those. You felt guilty, you know? Someone's life's being changed right now by what's going in. It's not about that. It's not about trying to say, look who's giving. It's about reminding us of what we're trying to accomplish together and having a tactile reminder, like, we're in this together, we're doing this together. We don't know where the money's coming from, but as an act of faith and courage and humility, we're saying, it's going around, and what are we doing together? Another thing, though, we're going to do it specifically when our kids are here. So it's going to happen every week, not in a huge like pomp and circumstance way. It's going to happen sometime as we're singing, and we still have to work out like how do we do that so it feels normal and kind of like us. But our hope is that we start modeling and demonstrating to our kids that giving is just a regular part of what it means to be a church community together. So whether our kids drop something in or not, whether they help pass it around or not, it gets stalled over here with Danielle, and Tate runs and grabs it and moves it to the next row. However we do that. Like, we're not having ushers. Like, that would just be way too formal for us. But we're going to pass this around. But we're going to start modeling for our kids. Like, this is part of what it means to be us. Where the efficiency of pre-authorized is beautiful, but it's out of sight, out of mind. And we forget that there's a formation that happens and a teachable moment that happens as we talk with our kids and we talk with each other and we pass this around. and we remember that money, there's a reason why Jesus says you cannot serve two masters. You cannot serve both God and money. There's a reason why Jesus says that, because the pull is so strong. We talked about that before, the sense of like idol that gets set up so easily, and it's so ingrained in our culture about what power money has. So it's an act of defiance for us to say money does not control me. Yes, if you're struggling, do not put yourself in a worse place. Like, don't do that. Let's figure out as a church how we can help you and get set up and find hope in all that. But at the same time, while we're doing that, we also need to say, okay, how are we going to figure this out? This is one of those real conversations that I have no idea how we're going to do it. And at the end of the first quarter, we'll keep you up to date. But at the end, in a couple months, we will have to be honest about where we're at or not at. And there may be some things we have to figure out in a different way that we weren't anticipating. And I know that affects me and affects us and how we do it. I don't know what that means. But I'm not afraid. I'm not worried about it. I feel like God has been so present with us this whole journey that if we don't make it, I feel like it's a change in our trajectory that we need to be okay with and pay attention to and be faithful in. Because maybe that shapes us in a way as a church that we're better for the next person who joins, who pulls up a seat at the table, the next person who wants to explore Jesus and hears that this has been part of our journey. So I'm okay with that. We'll figure that out as we go. It's also a chance for us to say, hey, like, do you see what we just did there? Do you see how God's faithful and provides? And in all of this, we can say God is good. So that's where we're at. That's what we're up to. I know it probably wasn't the talk you expected to have. We're jumping back to David next week, I promise. I won't drive all week to make sure we get there. But thanks for having this conversation. It can be a really weird one, but I wanted to just be honest about where we're at and the hope that's in that. I hope that as we talk about what it means to give and to pull together, and we start integrating this new rhythm for us that I never thought we would do, but we're going to do, that it teaches us something about what it means to belong to each other, to choose each other, and to together as a spiritual family say we're moving in this direction together. It's a reminder and a teaching moment for us. So before I just kind of pray and move into communion, any thoughts, questions, ideas, anything?
Did a good job.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. Cam.
I just wanted to encourage you guys in the leadership team. That's a good idea. Like I remember as a kid in the church I grew up in, they passed the plate, and I remember my dad putting all the bowls in, and it started a conversation like, Dad, what are you doing? Why do you do that? And so you got to teach me about tithing and inform what I believe about as well. So it's a good idea.
Cool. Thanks, Cam, for saying that. Anybody else? This is kind of our talking part of the time. Yeah, Christy.
I noticed you said a few times, it was maybe just the language around who knows what will come, or if we can raise 1,900, but I think we need to also be positive around it, like, because we could surprise ourselves. So
Right.
I think watching the language around it, that, yeah, who knows what could come from it.
Yeah.
Which I guess is the point, but I appreciate how honest and vulnerable you've been in sharing your story and about how we can just how we could maybe raise this, but it's a great conversation, and I think that we could all be pleasantly surprised by what happens with
Mm-hmm.
the basket.
Thank you for saying that. Sometimes my natural default is to not be negative, but I'm always trying to just paint like, it's not going to be easy. It's not like, we're going to get it. Don't worry. And so thank you for saying that. Wouldn't it be amazing? It would be amazing if we not only meet the need monthly, but we have extra coming in and we're saying, okay, in our 1+1+1 vision, here's what we're able to do locally now. Wouldn't that be amazing? To start saying, not only are we surviving, but now we're like moving beyond ourselves, because that's what it's all about. We don't need to do more than what we're doing for each other now. We're already there, right? Like, we have our midweek tables, we meet here on Sundays, we do things together, we serve. Okay, so we got our stuff. The church can't be just like more of our stuff. Okay, so what are we doing now? What is God inviting us into for the next season so we can be a blessing to other people? And then invite them maybe here one day, or maybe not, but we are shaped as we start serving and loving and caring for other people. Anyways, we could talk more about this. This isn't going to be an ongoing conversation. We're not going to spend a whole Sunday morning like this, but our plan is in the next couple weeks and months to give you updates as we're trying to figure out, okay, 2019, where are we headed, what's God saying? We can have more of these conversations afterwards. The night to come to our house and sing and pray, it's kind of a throwback to what we used to do back in when we first started. The reason why I wanted to do it sooner as a way of saying, let's just get together and sing and pray as a church. But the reason why it's not till March is because the first date I tossed out was next Sunday night. And then someone says, oh, that's Super Bowl. I was like, oh, yeah, that won't work. Then I tossed out the next Sunday night and someone's like, oh, that's the Grammys. I was like, oh, crap. The next Sunday night, I'm away. And so then we're now at March 3rd. But the heart of it all was to say, let's just get together again to sing and to pray and to worship and see what God is saying and doing, and just keep enjoying the rhythms of what it means to be like a spiritual community, and kind of on our own have conversations as a family or with friends or whatever that looks like, to say, how do I want to be a part of this? As Heidi said, part of this family and the cost that it takes for us to be who we are. So Daniel, why don't you and the crew come up? Let me just set up communion. You guys will know this, and if you're visiting, this is our weekly rhythm of reminding us what we're all about. And so the bread represents the body of Jesus, and the juice in the cup represents the blood of Jesus. And the church has been doing this since the very beginning, when Jesus first met with his friends around the table and says, do this in remembrance of me as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup. You proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. And so Stephanie Haval are going to be serving. There's a gluten-free option on this side. And I just encourage you, as we're singing, to come. And again, it's that beautiful physical, tactile reminder that we taste and we rip off and remember what we're about. This is for people who have chosen to follow Jesus to come forward and be like, we're a part of this family. And if you're saying yes to Jesus maybe today for the first time, it's like, and I want a part of this, and rip off a big chunk and dip it in and eat it. And it's one of the rhythms that the church has been involved in, and one of the rhythms that we use as a teaching tool, as a reminder, as a place of worship, of saying, Jesus, thank you for giving your life for us, for the freedom and forgiveness we have from sin, and we worship and we come around the table together. The table is open to all who want to come. So let me pray and we'll eat and sing. Jesus, thanks for this conversation. Thank you so much for the friends that are represented in this room. The ripples of stories that kind of go in all different directions. God, I really do believe that you're doing something exciting in our church. And this is, for the first time, I think, our first financial hurdle, I think of many, where we're trying to stretch and grow and move forward. And so in our first time, God, we just want to give thanks for the ways that you have provided and blessed and cared for us up until this point of the journey. God, thank you. Thank you for your faithfulness and your goodness to us. And when we give back, it's of a place and a posture of worship and thanksgiving for the ways you've cared and led us, and we give back with joyful hearts. As we receive the bread and the cup, it is also with a posture of humility and thankfulness, Jesus, for what you've done for us and the gift you've given us and the seat you've prepared for us at the table. So come, all those who are weary and heavy burdened. Come, those who need to find hope and forgiveness. Come, those who are with thankful hearts here today. Come, those who are in search of a Savior, in search of family, of belonging, of place. Come, those who have felt like they have tried and exhausted everything our world and culture has to offer, and they are left wanting. Jesus, meet us at this table as we stand, as we sing, as we worship. Jesus, for your honor and your glory. Amen.